Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by one of our earliest contributors, Dave Proudlove. How's it going, Dave? It's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, great to be back, mate. Thanks for having me along. It's been a busy week this week, to be honest, for various reasons. Messing about this morning, doorbell rings. I think, well, what's that all about? And there on the doorstep was a box containing these.
Of course, our listeners won't be able to see, but Dave is holding up a copy of his latest book, which is due for official release in 3 days' time, and is going to be the subject of our episode today. So for those listeners who don't know, Dave Proudlove is an author. He's released, I think, 5 or 6 different publications now, kind of spread across architecture, mainly from the places that he's lived, and football as well. And your last book, When the Circus Leaves Town, really marries those two interests together. It's all about clubs who left their stadiums after the publication of the Taylor Report, how different they are, place, all that kind of stuff. And your latest book that's coming out is going to be on the industrial roots of football in England, which is, of course, a massive subject, one that's really important and one that's really historically important as well, particularly to the heritage of a lot of clubs and a lot of towns within England as well. But I hope I've done that description of you justice, but just in case I haven't, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Dave, and the works that you've published previously, because I know you've got quite a big back catalogue for people to explore.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much nails it. The first book I wrote was called Ballad of the Streets, and that's about, to be quite honest, the place where I grew up in Stoke. The second book was Streets of My Own Town, which is very architectural, very heritage-based, about Tunstall. So there's 6 towns in Stoke-on-Trent. Tunstall is the most northerly, and that was my town. So it's where I had my first job. It's where I learned how to swim. It's where I bought my records. And it's where I discovered that I really got a thing for architecture. And yeah, When the Circus Leaves Town, that was the last one, and that was many years in gestation, really, because I worked on the redevelopment of Man City's old ground at Main Road, and witnessed all the change and the move, Man City's move to East Manchester, and I thought, yeah, I think it'd make good subject matter for a book, given the amount of clubs that had moved and whatnot, and I just didn't do anything about it for 10 years. And I eventually got pushed into doing it by my old mate, Carl. I cracked that. And one night, Alsager Town, club that I've been involved in for many years, were playing Vauxhall Motors at home.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the Vauxhall Motors name sort of does what it says on the tin. The team originates from the Vauxhall Motors car plant in Ellesmere Port. And I got chatting to one of their management committee before the game. And we got talking about works teams, or clubs that originated from factories or whatnot.
Sure.
At the time, there's quite a few in the North West Counties League, which Alsager are a part of. So obviously Vauxhall Motors, Camel Laird, Avro, who are now in the Northern Premier League, Pilkington, Cheadle Heath Nomads, and I was like, it was one of them. I got back home from the game and still got this thing buzzing around in my head about works teams. So out the phone comes and go, all right, let's have a look. And obviously, where do you start and where do you finish with it? It's a huge subject matter. And I thought, could be something interesting in this. Put the idea to Pitch Publishing, who published Circus, and they agreed. They thought it was a decent idea, and here we are. It's ready to go. Actually, I spoke to Chris Lee not so long back, and
of course, yeah,
from Outside Right, and the more I worked on Work and Play, it's a book primarily about football and football clubs, but it's as much about the game's relationship with industrial communities, with working class communities,
Absolutely.
and how in some cases, many cases actually, um, the clubs, take away your big boys, your Manchester Uniteds and Arsenals, who they have obviously former works teams, but
Hmm.
clubs further down the food chain, in some cases, they're the last remaining remnants of industry,
Yeah.
and you look at it, you think, oh, that this is really important stuff we're talking about here. So I actually see the book kind of a political statement in some respects, because the links, it's a three-way thing, and yeah, I'm quite pleased with how it's turned out. Actually, it's a football book. Yeah, of course it is, but I'd hope it also makes people think a little bit as well.
Hmm. No, definitely. I think you'd agree with me as well. Just on that, sorry, that by looking at these different things in a wider context, we realise actually how much kind of studying and researching football through different avenues like works teams or whatever is actually a good way to research social history as well and find out all these other different things about your town. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and I hope a lot of the listeners do pick it up because it's going to be brilliant. But it's great how your love of architecture and obviously social policy, which you've been involved in before, working with Alsager Town and community football, everything kind of comes out in these different books that you publish as well. Circus was a really great read. I really enjoyed Circus, so Work and Play is going to be brilliant when it's out as well. And it covers a really, really important subject, as we've mentioned before. So I suppose just to kind of kick things off properly, one of the things that was at the forefront of my mind, you mentioned a few club names there. Obviously, you have this concept of works teams, and I suppose at face value, you can take that as any club which is connected in some way to the industry or companies which sort of formed around it. But I suppose you've kind of got two different categories of works teams almost. You've got teams which were formed specifically for the workers of an industry or a firm, or you've got football teams which were founded within industrial areas and by default kind of became representative of those areas because they were surrounded by industry, but weren't necessarily established for like a particular industry or company, for example. So, up here, Rangers, obviously, they weren't founded as a works team, but part of their identity and heritage is the relationship with workers in the Glasgow shipyards. But then on the other hand, you've got Livingston, and the club who were originally founded, who would become Livingston FC, were actually called Ferranti Thistle and were founded as a works team of the Ferranti engineering plant. And then you've got other clubs who literally wear their names on their sleeves, like Inverurie Local Works, Forest Mechanics and stuff like that, So Motherwell as well, of course, another club that is kind of a hybrid of in between, because all of the people who founded Motherwell had this relationship with the steelworks, but the clubs they represented that then merged to become Motherwell weren't set up to be works teams. So you've got this different dynamic. So I suppose just to kick things off, have you focused specifically on teams which were founded to represent different companies, or are you just going for the full spread across the board, any club that can be linked back to industry? Because I think both of them are important and have different facets to them in their own right. But I'm just curious to know that first of all.
Yeah, I mean, it is a spread, to be fair. Most of the clubs that I have looked at directly came out of the workplace. So obviously, I've just mentioned Vauxhall Motors. There's no direct link between Vauxhall Motors Football Club and the car plant anymore, um, but it came from the car plant. At the other end of the spectrum, obviously Manchester United, came out of the Newton Heath plant in East Manchester, the railway carriage plant.
Mm.
Well, obviously the link between the two that was ruptured a long time ago. An interesting case study, which is in the close of the book, is Cadbury Athletic.
Of course, yeah.
So it's Cadbury Athletic's 30th anniversary this year, and there was a football club in Bourneville until the late 80s, folded. But Cadbury Athletic were formed 1994. But what's interesting about them is they, although they're not a works team, they have an affiliation with the Cadbury factory.
Of course.
And as a club, they've adopted the same kind of ethos that the Cadbury family had back in the late 1800s. Obviously, they play in the famous Cadbury purple colour. And
not a fan of that colour myself, so that quite interesting to see. But it's part of it's part of their identity. So
yeah, it's part of their identity, and it's different. It makes them different, and the ground they play at is just. I mean, it's a shame they'll never progress any higher than where they are, but I think they're comfortable with that. They're at peace with that.
Yeah.
Just where it is, they can't have floodlights basically. So,
I see.
But the ground and the setting is just it's magnificent. But the other teams that are, I mean, clearly they're not works teams anymore. The former colliery teams.
Of course.
And there's a whole group of them that I look at in the book. So clubs like Maltby Main, directly, they were the Maltby Main colliery, team, and that colliery is long gone. But the name Maltby Main, survives in the name of the football club.
Always very recognisable, the colliery teams as well, because of their badge. They have the the different structures related to mining and the lifts and stuff like that on it as well, so they're always very easy to discern. And again, as you're mentioning there, the inclusion of colliery in the name, massive thing for wearing who you are on your sleeve and telling people who you are. We'll come on to maybe talk about the collieries a little bit further, but it almost kind of points to before these clubs were integrated into larger league systems that there probably was some kind of colliery league or intermining league.
Oh yeah, there was, and same with trains as well.
Of course,
railway teams, loads of railway leagues. No, the colliery was lots of colliery leagues, and I think it was in the early 1900s. I think it was 1930s. The Northumberland County FA had, I think it was 498 teams registered with them, and the bulk of those were the colliery teams.
Amazing.
And then you had even some of these places were so big that they had their own leagues. I remember reading. I forget which colliery it was, but it was one. I was up Durham way. I think one of these collieries had 26 teams. So some of them are big enough to survive on their own. Never mind playing anybody else.
It's amazing once you get right down the rabbit hole of looking into it as well. And it actually just came to my mind. There's another great book that is out, published by Pitch Publishing. Can't remember the name of the author for the life of me, sadly, so I'll correct that when we put this episode out. It's called The Beautiful History Football Club Badges Tell the Story of Britain, and it's a follow-up to an earlier book called The Beautiful Badge, effectively looking into football badges, why changing them matters, and all the different things attached to them in terms of identity and stuff. And there was loads of clubs on there that were considered work teams. The Brewers, Burton Albion, I think that is obviously massive one, breweries everywhere. There's other clubs that kind of come to mind as well. But I think one of the things that stuck out for me and one of the things that is quite interesting to talk about is that actually when I was speaking to you about this in our WhatsApp group, I said, obviously I'm guessing this has come from Stoke being a club born from the Potteries, and you were like, actually they weren't. And I was like, that completely blew my mind. Do you know what I mean? Because Stoke, you always assume is being associated with the Potteries because they come from the pottery towns. But in actuality, they're not. And it's quite interesting how football clubs then use industry and industrial roots to actually kind of play into their heritage and their history, even if they weren't founded from potteries or industry or as work teams.
Yeah. Well, Stoke were technically a works team, not from one of the city's pot banks. They were a railway team.
Yes, that's right.
But there's no reference to. They were formed by a group of apprentices from the old North Staffordshire Railway Company, which was known locally as the Notty, but there's no reference at all to that side of the club's history. You look at, Stoke's current badge is, in my opinion, absolutely bloody dreadful. Um, and what the club's previous badges, which much there is reference to industry in the badges. Earlier iteration, we actually used the city's crest,
Yeah.
but there's never been any reference to the rail history that the club has, which it's it's a bit sad in a way. But the other thing as well, the club, the apprentices that form the club actually came from came from Surrey.
There you go.
So they came from the Charterhouse Public School. And they came to start their careers in the railways in North Staffordshire, and they've been exposed to an early form of football down there, and so they kicked things off as Stoke Ramblers.
Stoke Ramblers as well.
Yeah, and one of the characters had a really interesting life after leaving North Staff's Railway Company. Went into civil engineering. He ended up drowning at sea, I think, off the South American coast. So yeah, bit of an interesting life, I'd say.
Yeah, and there must have been so many stories that you've come across through researching this as well. But yeah, it's just interesting how there's this. I suppose perceptions is a massive thing when it comes to any kind of history, football history in particular. How clubs use perception to actually play into what their image and what their brand is in the modern day is a huge area of study as well. And there's falsehoods within that. There's half truths. There's all these different things that fans will say their club did in the past that aren't actually true, but it's been going around for so long that it's become sort of a truth, if that makes sense. It's become part of what you think the club is. And one of the biggest perceptions, obviously, is this idea that, football has always been for the working class, which I agree is true. But it's not quite as simple as that. And although the roots of football within England in particular had a huge industrial influence, and a lot of the early pioneering teams came from places with industries, there was also this kind of marrying in with the elite, people who played with rugby teams, people who played in private school teams and with cricket teams, who then went on to make the rules of the game. So from what you've studied, would you say it swings one way or the other, or would you say being able to play football from these industrial communities was pivotal to the founding of the game, or would you say that it's more important that these guys from the middle upper class or whatever, was it more important that they made the rules?
Well, I think there's two ways of looking at it, isn't there? I mean, what you've just said about the history of how it developed is obviously accurate. I mean, it depends how far back you want to go with these things. And I mean, football as we know it was, it was a tamed version of sort of mob and street football.
That's right.
The people in public schools took that, they tamed it, and then it sort of swung back towards, our way, let's say.
Yeah.
But modern football as we know it is it's a working class pursuit. Although that's, I'd say, getting quite questionable these days. Certainly in the upper echelons of the game, anyway.
Definitely, waters have been mudded quite a bit.
The truth is never just black and white, is it?
No.
It's far more complicated. And you just mentioned truths, half truths, and myth and rumor and whatnot, and it's the same. I was thinking when you were saying that at Stoke City Football Club, because obviously we're always spoken of as currently the second oldest professional club in the country, Notts County being the oldest. and that
course.
we were formed in 1863. That might not necessarily be the case. I mean, the red half of Nottingham, um, they argue that they're the second oldest professional club behind County, um, because there's very little documentary evidence of Stoke being formed in 1863.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that came out through a fella called Wade Martin, who used to be the club's official historian. He produced a book in the 1980s called Potter's Tale, which it was official history of the club as it was at that point, and he couldn't find anything.
There you go.
So
It is interesting as well how football clubs will attach this founding date to them or founding
yeah,
year, and then it will come out that actually there's not a lot of evidence to support it. I mean, just to use my own club, Celtic, for example, the big thing with us and a lot of Celtic fans has always been the kind of core sentence around why Celtic were formed. I think it's, to paraphrase, a football club will be founded to provide for the poor Irish immigrants of the East End of Glasgow or something along those lines. But as it's turned out recently, that line never existed in any form of constitution found in the club in any kind of speech. It's been paraphrased and it's just kind of been passed down through the years, but it was never ever said. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't really exist. And yeah, I mean, that could be a completely different episode in itself. Football clubs and perception and founding myths, if you like that, origin myths
yeah,
are obviously quite a big thing just within folklore and culture and storytelling within the
yeah.
UK as
I
well.
mean,
So it's crazy.
the Wade Martin, the earliest documentary evidence he could find of Stoke's formation was from 1868 onwards. So, of course, we were founded in 1863, of course.
It's mad, and I love it. But that's part of what historical research is. Do you know what I mean? It's trying to uncover as close to the
Yeah,
truth as you can.
100%. And yeah, I mean, let's face it, it's all part of the set. We all love that sort of thing. It's all part of football. I mean, well, one of the things that I came across researching work and play, one of the former colliery teams that look at, based in Somerset, and never really associate coal mining with Somerset, really. You but the North Somerset coalfield, was quite. It was exhausted by
Mm.
1960s, and what was left was totally uneconomic to mine. Well, Radstock Town, there's it's been suggested that there was evidence of a football club in Radstock in the 1820s, which I'd love to do some proper research on that, because that'd shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, it's like the football club from Edinburgh. It was literally just called the Foot-Ball Club, who was founded by John Hope. Really, really nasty gentleman, to be completely honest, but was pivotal in the founding of what is considered to be the world's first not professional but association football club, as he drafted up his own set of rules. So it's interesting that as research continues, these things will keep coming out, and as is the case with Radstock, they might end up being older than Football Club in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I just it's one I've got penciled away to try, and when I get a spare day or so, I'll start looking at. But yeah, I thought, well, that's a potentially interesting rabbit hole, that one.
Mm-hmm. And just to go back to work and play, what have been the best stories or the best discoveries that you've made while you've been researching and writing the book? As we've mentioned, the industrial roots of football is a huge topic. You could have written several books on it, I'm sure. But I want to know some of the best stories or some of the best discoveries that you made while you were writing the book, whether it's about a club or anyone else associated with them.
Yeah, I mean, the first one was to do with Manchester United, to be honest, because one of my best mates is a Manchester United supporter. He's from Manchester, proper dyed in the wool mank. And the fella that set up Newton Heath, the football club there, was actually from Liverpool. So I picked right, talking to him, Mike, and said, "Oh, do you realise, mate, that your football club was formed by a Scouser?" And it was like silence, and then quite a few expletives. I did enjoy it. I just for personal perspective, that was good. One of the stories that I did enjoy, West Auckland Football Club, the first World Cup winners. That's a nice little story. And well, nice story. Bit of sadness too, because obviously the original trophy got nicked. Got a replica, but it's not the same, is it? But
No.
Another good story. So Colville Town, Colville, a club that I knew well. So first semi-pro club that I got involved in was literally my local club here in Biddulph, Victoria. We had to fold at the end of the 2010-11 season, and Colville Town were in our league, Midland Football Alliance, and they were on the up. They really were on the up. And our last game was against Colville, but although it's not directly related to Colville Town Football Club, one of the best stories that came across was to do with the Colville Munitions Girls Football Club. They were formed during the First World War, and they basically they worked in the munitions factory during the day, and then they played football. And
nice.
They are the only women's winner of the Bass Charity Vase and the competition's 134 history, 134 year history. So you've got names on that trophy like West Bromwich Albion, Leicester Foss, Derby County, and Colville Munitions Girls Football Club, which that was a great little story.
It's an amazing bit of history, that, isn't it?
Yeah. One of obviously the earlier pioneers of the ladies' game. You think of Dick Kerr ladies and whatnot, and they're up there, in East Midlands amongst that. That was a really nice little discovery, that one. My other favourite, and it's kind of it's not a story as such, but I didn't know until I started researching the book. I've always loved the London Underground, and the London Underground have got their own football league, which is that's great.
It's amazing, isn't it? I remember seeing that, and I was like, "That's such a good idea. I love it. It's so cool."
Yeah, but it goes back to the old, thing of railway companies, having their own leagues. Like it's the exact same principle. But I love that just because love the London Underground. I mean, they're talking about actually forming a London Underground team to actually go into the football pyramid. So that could be quite interesting. And then obviously the other story, which I've sort of kind of spoken about, is the formation of Cadbury Athletic. I do like the reason I like that is because although let's be honest, works teams or works affiliated teams are more a thing of the past. And the fact that they formed this club fairly recently, it's only 30 years old, and they've got an affiliation with the factory. They've got those links, and the way they're going about operating the club, it's really community focused, community oriented, and it's they play the football in such a fantastic setting. And you think about Bourneville and how it was developed and why it was developed.
Of course,
the idea of a football club operating in that way, it's a perfect match. So there's various other sort of individual little snippets as well. Well, loads of them. But in terms of they're probably my favourite stories.
I suppose you don't want to give too much away because we do want our listeners to buy the book and read it as well.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I mean, I could have said no, just buy the book. Here we are, available. All good bookshops. Well, but no,
read the full thing.
it's just an absolutely fascinating subject area,
Hmm.
and
It certainly is.
it is one of them. You have to stop somewhere. Unfortunately,
I know, and again, it's a lot of it all comes back to perceptions. I mean, for myself anyway, of course, I suppose I'm of the era where work teams to me are definitely a thing of the past. I can't remember there being any works representatives teams in the kind of higher reaches of Scottish football since I was born, basically, and that is just a generational thing. So I agree with you there, but also it can come back to the kind of social context that we're living in as well. So, for example, if you look at England, in the face of it, you're going to assume the majority of the clubs that you talk about are from the north of England, maybe the Midlands, other parts of Wales, another bit as well, and anywhere where there's going to be concentrated areas of industry, such as coal mining if it's more rural, and then anywhere that's within a city, you know. But I suppose one of the perceptions would be the majority of it would be in the north of England, but I can imagine that's not entirely true because you have shipyards, you have places within cities that are really densely populated, that are huge centres of industry, and a lot of these clubs would have came from cities as well. I mean, has anything surprised you in breaking down those perceptions that other people see? Because I think it's quite easy for people to forget, especially in this era of there being the big north-south divide that's constantly pushed to us. It's important to remember that there are people out there, and there are other groups of people during this time who worked within industrial areas in the north and south. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they would have had more in common with each other than their managers, for instance. Is there anything that's really helped kind of break down those perceptions for you, or changed your opinion on what those perceptions might actually be? Basically, has anything surprised you when you've been researching this in terms of those kind of perceptions and labels that are put on people?
Um, to be honest, no, there's not been really many surprises. The reason I say that, and to be fair, it's primarily because of what I do for a day job.
Of
Um,
course.
Working in regeneration and whatnot for such a long time, and appreciate that there are there are other parts of London. Some parts of London are incredibly deprived, and they tend
Absolutely.
to be, you know, working class areas where industry has been and gone. And there are people in the East End of London that have got as much in common with somebody from the shipyard on in Birkenhead than
Yep.
than anything else. So there are patterns there. Um, in terms of the book, yeah, the bulk of the book is north of England,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Yorkshire and the northeast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's because I decided to sort of break it down into sort of various. The first section of the book is about big clubs that have come out of the workplace, but
Yep.
the bulk of the book is about football away from the sort of the upper reaches of the game. So
Of
I
course.
look at sort of coalfield communities, railway towns, and whatnot. And a particular part of the world that has just had a personal fascination for me. Um, so where I live, like right on the North Staffordshire, border,
Mm-hmm.
literally, 5 minutes from where I am, I'm on the Cheshire Plain, and
Yeah.
obviously most people associate Cheshire with money and particularly these days, but
Of course.
North Cheshire is heavily industrialised,
It was.
and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
there's lots of clubs that have come out of industry and those parts of Cheshire. So I wanted particular, and although they're a bit of a bogey club to Old Sage, one of my favourite little clubs has been Camel Laird for years, because the people that run the club are they're such lovely, friendly, people.
Mm-hmm.
And So I thought, well, I want to get Camel Laird in the book, so I'm I'm going to look at North Cheshire. But there is an interesting juxtaposition there between people's perception of what Cheshire is as a place,
Yeah.
and what the reality is. Yeah, there is a lot of money in Cheshire, but at the same time, there's still these, working class places hanging on in there, and football is a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like Fife. Do you know what I mean? Like Fife, it's one of the smaller counties in Scotland. Don't get me wrong, but on one hand you've got St Andrews, where there's a huge concentration of wealth, and then you've got all the former shipyards like Methil, Leven, and stuff like that, which are really deprived areas, but also areas of former industry, where football teams have sprouted as well. East Fife, of course, probably being the best example of that. It's probably the same in so many other regions of the country as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not referenced in the book, but the character behind it is. I did some work up in the northeast, must be 7 or 8 years ago, in a community called Wynyard. Now Wynyard is it's an extremely exclusive sort of residential community.
Sure.
When I say it's footballers' mansions territory, it really is. There's Alan Shearer used to live on there, so you remember when the controversy, I think it was Freddie Shepherd, wasn't it? It was recorded calling Alan Shearer and Mary Poppins or something like that. And the Shearer was living on Wynyard at the time, and I did the lady that took me around the estate. She was like, "That's Alan Shearer's house, or was Alan Shearer's house. He doesn't live here anymore. He lives in James Morrison. He'd still got a property there at the time. Thomas Sorensen, when he was with Sunderland, he lived there, which was a point of interest for me because he had a great time at Stoke. But you've got this like really wealthy enclave, which was built in the grounds of Wynyard Hall, and literally just down the road, you've got really deprived industrial communities, and the gentleman that built the Wynyard estate was Sir John Hall. Who there's a bit about Mr. Hall in the book.
Look forward to reading that as well. Yeah, I mean it's one of those things, and I suppose it kind of in some ways ties in with what you were talking about in Circus and what the wider theme was, and when a circus leaves town, is that obviously through these football clubs founding within industrial communities and growing, they then had to get a space, i.e. a stadium and a ground, and the community would have formed around the football ground as much as the football team and the ground would have formed around the community. It's, very kind of mutually beneficial in that respect. So in some cases you can see football clubs maybe as being byproducts of the industry where they came from or the industries that they grew up with and because of. And then obviously in Circus you mentioned, these grounds were then moved. Some of them moved to industrial estates outside of towns and they're very soulless. So I suppose with the way that some football clubs have been founded and, developed through the years, would you agree that would you agree that their stadiums then being moved out of town is a bit of a byproduct of deindustrialization? I know we're going slightly off topic here, but I think it's quite an interesting point that we can, kind of dig a lot out of.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's historic processes as well that relate to that. And Stoke, an example of that. So, one of Stoke's first grounds, their second ground actually, they were moved on to what obviously became the Victoria ground. So the ground that they had, it was Glebland, and it was sold to build houses on. They said, "Oh, it's okay. You can move to the athletic ground just there." So the irony to it is, obviously the terraced housing that was built helped to form the character. So the view from the back of the old Stoke end, these
Of
terrace
course, yeah,
houses,
yeah,
and
yeah,
everybody thinks, oh yes, Well, actually, the reason they're there is because Stoke got kicked out of their old ground.
yeah. Uh-huh.
But you're right about the out
Yeah.
of town switches and deindustrialisation, because again with Stoke, um, Stoke's current ground was built on a former colliery,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
so that move came about because of the loss of industry
Hmm.
in Stoke-on-Trent, um, and that's a pattern that is replicated
Hmm.
again. Riverside Stadium, Middlesbrough.
Yep.
All the changes around you know the Teesside docks and whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
still huge challenges there now.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's quite ironic as well. But just when you mentioned terrace housing, actually, it came back into my head that obviously we associate terrace housing with being part of the proper football experience in air quotes. Whereas, as you've just mentioned there, at the time, football clubs were kicked out so that properties could be built, presumably for profit. Whereas now, and as you mentioned in Circus quite a lot of the places you went to visit where the former stadiums were like Persimmon Homes, Red Row Houses, Cala Estates,
yeah,
and it's all these new build kit houses that are called like, Victoria Way or Tony Pulis Avenue. And it's like, and it's weird because it's come full circle in like a really kind of corrupted fashion and twisted way, because it's like, whereas these terraced housing at the time, for the most part anyway, were being built to house worker populations and the growth of these worker populations, whereas now they're being built on top of part of industry, and it's very, very middle class, you have to say, and they're making a mockery of it by then saying, oh, don't worry, we'll give you names, and it's just like generic names attached to football club, like followed by street or road or credit. Do you know what I mean? So there's a weird irony in how it's come full circle almost.
yeah. I mean, when Stoke left the Victoria ground, you always sort of kind of knew what was going to happen.
Mm.
You kind of knew there was going to be a very typical, standardised approach to the site's redevelopment, with a few token gestures towards
Yeah.
its history. The token gestures being the street names, or a plaque where the centre circle was, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what happened. And you go around. I've looked at obviously lots of them, and the majority of cases that's exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Highfield Road, Coventry could have been interesting,
Yep.
and
Definitely.
you kind of when you're there, you can see what they tried to do. So Highfield, the redevelopment of Highfield Road, there is a huge, like, sort of central grassed area. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so as somebody that's worked in a planning department writing planning briefs, you can imagine a planning officer has written a brief for this site. We
Mm-hmm.
want a central, what in effect was the bloody pitch. We want that as a public open space with
Yep.
the residential development on the perimeter overlooking it, which you
Yep.
think that's not a bad idea. Um, how it's panned out in reality ain't so good, like, but at least you can kind of understand what they were trying to do.
Sure.
Some of them, and it's a horrible thing to say in some respects, because what you're talking about is people's homes. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, when I go down to Stoke's old place now, it's full of people living there, and I know Stoke supporters have bought houses there because it's the old place. And I kind of think I ought to hang my head in shame a little bit for my
Yeah.
cynicism towards it, because that's just, it's me and my sort of, that's my view. Their view is, wow, I've got a house here in the Goalmouth, the
Yep.
Bootham end, and yeah, I kind of get that. Um, Visiting Sunderland's old place, Roker Park. That was the first chapter in When the Circus Leaves Town. It was like first one. It's a it's a good walk from the city centre to there. And then you get there and you think, this is it then.
I know.
Promotion Drive, Goalmouth Avenue, and stuff like that.
The big one that I always go back to up here, and I never got to experience it, so I could be completely wrong, but Brockville and Falkirk, where it's 5-minute walk from a station, 5-minute walk from the town centre, easily accessible for everyone. And then when it went and the Falkirk Stadium was built, it's well out of town. If you live in the other end of Falkirk, then it's at least 2 buses away, and they get a lot of stick because it's technically in Grangemouth or closer to Grangemouth than it is to Falkirk or something, which is it's a bit of a separate place, so it's a bit weird. But in that case, Brockville had to go, and I know there's caveats and stuff like that, but it's a shame when you have these grounds that are so central to places and communities and people that then end up getting moved outside, and it's just such a massive shame. And again, the decline of industry is part of that, because it did affect so many football clubs and the people who supported them as well. One thing that I wanted to ask, and I suppose it's probably the biggest question of the lot that I've got for you: how important is industry and the history of industry to football and the growth of football in England?
I mean, the book illustrates, you've had teams and clubs that have come directly from the workplace, so that's been important. But not just that, you've had industrialists that may not have formed but have supported clubs. So one of the most interesting early characters of the game, of course, was Mr. Suddle, who was chairman of Preston North End and funded the Invincibles, but unfortunately, it turned out he was a crook. He was diverting money that he shouldn't have done from the mill he was managing to underpin Preston and their early success. But that's an example of somebody in industry that has supported the development of a club. And I say not one that's come directly out of the workplace.
Of course.
But even when football changed and the clubs became independent from Manchester United becoming Manchester United, ultimately in these places industry was still supporting football clubs, because the supporters were going into the workplace, they were earning their money, and they were going and they were spending it watching the game. It's a cycle. That cycle obviously is still there, but not to the extent as it was, because it's a heavy industry as we knew it isn't there anymore. But as long as there are working people going into there is still a tangential link there, isn't there?
There is, yeah. Just off the back of that, and finally my last question for you as well: do you think that without industry and without the way that football teams formed because of and around industry, do you think that football in England would have developed the way that it did?
No, I don't think it would. And I think you take the industry side away from it, would football have remained sort of, I don't know, the preserve of those in public schools? In which case, would it have been an amateur pursuit? You can't speculate. But at the end of the day, industry and millions of people who found their livelihoods in industrial workplaces, they pursued football, and ultimately that led it to becoming the popular game. So no, I don't think football would have evolved the way it has without it, and that's why, in some respects, football is, I feel, at a bit of a crossroads these days, because of where I suppose in some respects we can all, as a football supporter, we can all be a bit hypocritical, because we'd all love our club to be up there doing the business, but I don't know. I'm increasingly finding difficulty with top level football for lots of different reasons. You know, how different interests are prioritised over, you know, the people that have, you know, I've say it in the book, but you know, when the European Super League thing kicked off, and we were talking about they wanted a different type of supporter, referring to people like me as a legacy supporter. Don't care about that, mate. You know, that's a badge of honour. If you want to call me a legacy supporter, call me a legacy supporter. But you know, it's the Premier League and TV changed everything, and football's football. And you know, there's a lot of people that I know that have, you know, mate of mine, massive Stoke supporter, doesn't go anymore. So he goes to the local non-league club here over the hill. Another mate of mine who Stoke, he still does go Stoke, but not so often. And what he tends to do is there's loads of non-league clubs in. That's one of the challenges with non-league football around here. We've got lots of clubs and a small pool of available players, so
Of course.
it's tough. And he goes one club one week, he just flits around. Oh, the Congleton game looks interesting this week. I'll go to Congleton. And I think that squeeze from the top end of the game could lead to a real revival at the bottom end of the game, because the experience is completely different. The experience at the lower levels of the game is more attuned to the experience that actually people want. I mean, ideally, you'd want that experience with the club that they, you know, I'd want that experience at Stoke. But I think a lot more people will find it elsewhere. And that's heartening, really, in some respects.
It is, yeah, no, and I actually agree with you. I think with this squeeze down and with, you know, ground hopping's obviously a massive thing at the moment. Footballology and the people on that app, the people going around all these grounds and trying to experience different forms of football. I think it is leading to a big revival and a kind of love for football lower down the divisions. And in a way, it's kind of sad because it's kind of, in some ways, it's incentivizing people to go out and support their local, but the byproduct of it is obviously they do. So, you know, there's a trade-off there as well. But like you mentioned, obviously money coming into the game obviously changed everything, and it's probably the reason why there aren't as many work teams and why work teams will struggle to exist in this day and age. It's that, well, if you found a work team, then you're already having to pay for money to get them a pitch, to pay the players, presumably, to do this, that, and the next thing. The dynamics of society and how we work and how we experience life as workers has completely changed. And so the idea of a works team kind of coming up and being able to go on their own and work their way up the pyramid without changing their name or moving to big grounds and having to trade some of what they are away. Livingston, again, probably the best example of it. You know, they wouldn't be able to do that. If a team, for example, founded as, I don't know, Tesco FC, obviously they've got a huge financial backing, but if they're just forming within a community, then how are they going to work their way up the pyramid without then having to change their name to something that's a lot more identifiable for people? Because you're not going to get to a top division, you're not going to get to the Premier League by calling yourself Tesco FC and playing on an AstroTurf round the back of the shop. Do you know what I mean? And that's obviously a pretty bad example, but I hope I hope our listeners understand where I'm coming from with that.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think if Mike Ashley could have got away with it, I think he'd have called Newcastle United Sports Direct United.
Probably, yeah.
And if you looked at St James's Park at the time, you might have thought that. But no, I take your point. I mean, I think what occurred to me, if I'm being totally honest, I don't think I articulate it in the book. To works teams, and the reason I don't think that a works team in the traditional sense would arise and work today is, you think back then, teams that came out of the workplace, it was a group of people that worked together in potentially dangerous circumstances, and they had to have each other's back. And so those that play football together, you carry that same spirit and ethos onto the football pitch. So actually, for them, money would not necessarily have been, the thing. The thing was, togetherness, work, and then they bring that into the, I'm doing the work and play thing here, aren't I?
You're right though. You are right. It's interesting looking at that as well, and I suppose it's quite easy to forget as well that industry, to my generation particularly, is nowhere near what it used to be even 40, 50 years ago. That's before you then go back to when a lot of football clubs were formed for industry and around industry in the mid 1800s. So, in the coal fields here in some parts of Lanarkshire and Ayrshire, you would have had tens of thousands of people. You would have had villages and towns, that some of which are still existing today, which would have been built to house those people. They would have known each other very, very well. There would have been a chemistry between them even before you get them onto a football pitch, and it creates a completely different mentality. And a book that I've mentioned quite a lot before, The Three Kings by Leo Moynihan, he talks about Matt Busby, Bill Shankly, and Jock Stein, and it kind of says that the background that these guys had growing up in mining towns and as miners shaped how they became football managers, because they had a very, very distinct mindset that was essentially forged in the pits, right? And that's what led to them becoming successful. I mean, you had Glenn Buck in Ayrshire, where I think it was Shankly was where he was from, where it never exceeded 1,000 people in population. 80% of them worked in the mine, and they managed to produce something like 112 professional footballers and managers over the space of, I think it was 30 years or something. Incredible, considering. So it just goes to show you how much industry has actually influenced football and how teams played football as well. But to kind of go back to what I was saying at the beginning there, because industry isn't the same as what it used to be, in some steelworks and steel plants, there would have been, again, tens of thousands of people working there. And some of the large engineering places, the manufacturing and fabrication places here, you'll maybe struggle to reach 30 people. Are most of those guys going to be fit to play football? Sadly not, because a lot of these trades are dying, are already dead. And unfortunately, because of how society has moved on, deindustrialization, Thatcherism, etc., without going down that route, but because of how...
Oh, I go down it, don't worry.
Yeah. You said it yourself, though, historic processes, historic context, these things have all combined to mean that these work teams will probably, sadly, never see their lives again.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. So interesting, and I do mention this in the book. Mention the level of professional players and managers that part of Scotland produced. Now it's the same in the northeast of England, and you read into the story of Jack and Bobby Charlton, and
Of course.
the spectre of going down the pit drove them towards professional football. They saw professional football as their two options were professional football or go down the pit. And their dad didn't want them going down the pit, and they didn't want to go down the pit. So that the football was that was their carrot. And
it was a way out.
It was a way out. But you look, and again, I refer to this in the book. Jack Charlton was interviewed by Wogan around the time of the miners' strike, 84, 85, and Wogan asked Jack what he thought, and Jack was, the lads there are on strike. They're just trying to save jobs in their communities, aren't they? And Wogan said, would you be on strike, Jack? And he was like, yeah, of course I would. They got out, and there was lots of, the northeast of England, the players and managers, two of the game's greatest English managers came from that neck of the, Bobby Robson, Bob Paisley in particular. But as a manager, again, his managerial style again was probably a product of his background.
Yeah, and it all came from industry, and I think that's the important point, is that, of course, this isn't just an English centric or a UK centric thing. This happened all over Europe, and industry has a huge role to play in how football developed and how it's consumed today. And it's great researching and chatting about this aspect of the game that's often always present, because we're always reminded of it, but it's never really looked into past the face value of it. Have you enjoyed researching this book, Dave? Obviously, you kind of alluded to it being something that was a bit new for you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the link between football and industry has always been there, because let's face it, in effect, I was a part of it. My dad was a potter. Um, I grew up in an industrial community and went to the football. But works teams, yeah, you always know, everybody knows about Manchester United, Arsenal, whatever. And I'd had my experience with Alsager coming across the lights of Camel Laird and whatnot, and I just thought this is a direction I want to explore, and yeah, I'm glad I went down. I'm glad I went down that direction. As I say, it's like, where do you draw the line? You have to draw the line somewhere, because it's an absolute gold mine.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect point for us to finish up on before we reveal any more about this book. Is there anything else that you want to add just before we finish up for tonight, Dave?
No, I just big thanks for having me along for a chat, and I really appreciate the support from yourself and the guys.
No, Dave, you're welcome back on the show anytime. Obviously, the work that you're putting out on the website as well has been fantastic, and long may that continue. It's been a pleasure having you on board, and a pleasure having you back on the show. So to all of our listeners, please go and check out Dave's new book. It's called Work and Play, The Industrial Roots of English Football. I think I've got that right. We'll put all the links out to it on our X page and whatever else. Of course, if there's something that you want us to cover that we haven't done so yet, I think might be interesting, please do get in touch with us. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. But for now, Dave, say goodbye.
See you guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's a goodbye from me as well, and we'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.